This is ILF Radio, our weekly podcast, where we peek into the soul of Indian heritage with our esteemed guests and listen through the old seasoned walls. This week, we'll embark upon the journey of how Sultangari, a mausoleum commissioned by Iltutmish, was able to survive under a dynamic group of rulers, to have later become a part of Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign and see itself revive. All of this comes down to Sultangari emerging as a sacred site which has found a special place in the hearts of people, all faiths alike. So now, let's get the journey started.
Hi, I'm your host Rashmi from India Lost and Found. For this episode, we have Akash Chattopadhyay with us. Akash is a history enthusiast pursuing an MPhil in the same field. His main interest lies in reading about the Mughals and medieval India, military history, as well as the Second World War. He's also been a passionate resident of Delhi since the last 8 years. Coming to Delhi, the capital of India, is said to be a city that has been built, destroyed, and rebuilt several times. Because of its strategic location, Delhi saw an influx of foreign invaders for centuries and hence became an important seat of power. The movement and later the settlements resulted in the exchange of authority and culture, of whose visible remnants remain the monuments, cenotaphs constructed on a large scale. While we see a large number of tourists who visit the famous monuments of Qutub Minar, Humayun's Tomb, and Red Fort, there lies a lesser known gem hidden in the midst of uptown Delhi. It is arguably the oldest Islamic tomb in India, called Sultangari. Welcome, Akash.
Hi, Rashmi, and a warm welcome to everyone who's listening in. Considering the extremely harrowing times that we've somehow survived through, it's great to be engaged in such an activity and also to be able to reach out to people. So that's a very heartening sensation, and I'm very happy to be doing this.
Yes, absolutely. I think art, culture, music helps us to keep sane at such times.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, before we really delve into the topic, I would like to know from you what really intrigued you the most about Sultangari.
Like you already mentioned, I've been a very passionate resident of Delhi for the last 8 years. I'm head over heels in love with the city. It's quite well known among the people who know me. And when you join that with my academic and personal, obsession with medieval Sultanate and Mughal India, it's pretty obvious that I was aware of Sultangari from a very early point of time
Mm-hmm.
during my residence in Delhi. But it was only during my second year in MA that I actually delved into its history because I was working on the site for a paper that I was writing
Right.
for my course, and that allowed me to visit the site on multiple occasions and really spend some incredibly enlightening hours there, and really become one with the story of this quite enchanting but often neglected monument. So yeah, that's where really the story began for me.
Okay. So going back in time, what was Delhi like, at that point in time? Or rather, where was Sultangari really placed in that period and what's its significance?
Yeah. So let me set it up first. So Sultan Ghadi or Sultan Gadi is today a locality that surrounds the monument itself, and is situated on the southwestern outskirts of Delhi, within the larger Vasant Kunj area and east of Mahipalpur village. So this
Hmm.
is somewhat in between the stretch of road that lies between the Delhi Aerocity metro station and the Chhatarpur metro station. So it's somewhere in between those two. And it centers, of course, on a 13th century mausoleum that we are going to be talking about today. And this was, of course, built by Shamsuddin Iltutmish, the second sultan of the slave or the Mamluk dynasty of the 13th century. And it was built for his eldest son, who was Abul Fath Nasiruddin Mahmud in AD 1231. Now, it is believed by many to be the first monumental Indo-Islamic tomb of royal patronage in Delhi, or perhaps even in South Asia. And certainly, on this scale, at least, it is probably the the earliest surviving one. And an ASI study that was conducted in the mid 20th century and was published in the Ancient India Journal also mentioned that the area had been deserted roughly 2 centuries ago. So somewhere in the late 18th century, give or take, due to a severe drought. Although today, of course, a combination of modern colonies and more simpler localities dot the landscape around the monument. Now, Sultangari is, really of note as much as for its architecture as it is for the memory that has come to surround it. It might not be obvious on first glance or on face value because it is somewhat, located on the fringes of modern Delhi, and it is not that well known, and it is somewhat difficult to visit also at times. But it is certainly significant in the context of the foundational decades of the Sultanate in the 13th century, and also in the occasional relevance that it had in the royal landscape of the capital city, and its current significance today in the 21st century as a mazar. So none of these things can really be overlooked, and that is why I also feel very strongly about this place. Now, it is believed that so now, of course, getting back to the meat of your question, which is its location in time and place, it is believed that a Tomar prince named Mahipal built an embankment or bund nearby the current location of Sultangari, roughly around the second half of the 10th century, from which grew the name of Mahipalpur, which is still the name of that particular neighborhood of that area. And of course, this is the time in the early medieval period when Delhi comes under the Tomar the Tomar domains. This is, of course, before the Delhi Sultanate. Now, the resulting reservoir in the otherwise dry terrain and the surrounding elevated landscape, which was, of course, made up of hard Delhi quartzite, sandy soil, and bushy vegetation, indicates possible habitation in the area for about 2 centuries or more before the mausoleum was built in the 13th century. And it also explains, or it possibly explains, the appeal that this area and this location held for Sultanate rulers, as an aesthetic and practical setting for a major funerary monument and project. So, as we all well know, the Delhi Sultans took a special interest in constructing or renovating man-made water features like canals and channels and tanks, talabs, and so on, and often locating their tomb next to them, like Firoz Shah Tughlaq at Hauz Khas, just to cite a very prominent example. And the Mughals, of course, also carried this tradition forward in various ways. So, while accounting for other factors, a more temporally motivated reasoning behind the site and its usage, emerges from a look at the political geography of Delhi. So instead of looking at what happened after and what happened before, you can just take a glance at the immediate reality of Delhi in the early 13th century under Iltutmish to gauge why this monument might have been of some critical significance. So Iltutmish, as we know, or at least some of you might know, is credited with finally ensuring Delhi's victory over the rival North Indian Sultanate. So today we study about the Delhi Sultanate as a be-all and end-all entity, but in the early 13th century, following the conquest of Muhammad Ghori, there were a number of individual sultanates dotted across north and northwestern India or the subcontinent. And it was only under Iltutmish that Delhi emerged victorious over all of them and became the predominant political force in the north. And another very important event that took place in AD 1229 was the official recognition for the Sultanate that came from the Abbasid Caliphate, which really sanctioned this political entity and gave it an air of legitimacy. But it was bittersweet because it's in the same year that Nasiruddin Mahmud dies. Iltutmish's eldest son dies, and he was he was really promising as a prince, and he was looked at as the possible successor to Iltutmish. He was the governor in the east in Lakhnauti, which is today in Bengal, and he was referred to as the king of the kings of the east, even though he was not technically a king till then, but that was his standing. In inscriptions and so on, we find that reference. But sadly enough, he dies in AD 1229, And this is also the time when the Sultanate was still fashioning its authority. This is in the early 1230s under Iltutmish, who was a very proactive sultan. And the might of the state would be on ample display in the form of a daunting mausoleum, because it's visible, it has a certain amount of power to it. And sadly enough, Nasruddin Mahmud's death, while tragic, also gave Iltutmish the opportunity to build such a mausoleum and convey some sort of royal authority through it as well, through its appearance. So while the tomb itself is located inside a crypt-like domed chamber into which you have to descend via some stairs, the overall robust edifice in its raised form has domed topped towers on its four corners, and all of it resembles a small fortress, which conveys both the ascendant Sultanate power of the time as well as a warning to potential dissenters. And this is where I should also mention that the name of Sultangari is quite interesting, because on the one hand it is often referred to as Sultan Ghadi, which would mean the house of the Sultan. But on the other hand, it is also often referred to as Sultan Garhi, which would translate into being the fortress of the Sultan. And in both cases, of course, you can understand the visual similarity that you can kind of find with the name itself. But why here? Again, coming back to your question about its location and why there and so on. This was a question that I was also fascinated by, which is that what is it that convinced Iltutmish to position his eldest son's imposing mausoleum not inside his capital, which was in the Sheher or the Delhi Kohna of Mehroli, Mehroli of course being a later name, but instead where it is today. So here again, we might have a possible glimpse into the larger purpose which was being served by this monument, not just through its aggressive appearance, but also through its positioning in the geography of 13th century Sultanate Delhi. Now, in the 1230s, the landscape of Delhi still represented a motley group of settlements separated by vast swathes of territory. So in addition to the walled city of Delhi Kohna, which is today in Mehroli, to the southwest, we find neighborhoods like Inderpat, Ghiaspur, which is today the Nizamuddin, Basti, and Humayun's tomb area, Kilokri, which was to the south of that, and Bhogol. So these were all skirting the Yamuna to the north and northeast of Mehroli. Now, this comprehensive imagination of Delhi beyond these little clusters and encompassing a much wider radius was what the Persian historiography of the time would have referred to as the Sheher wa Kasba wa Muzafat. So the Sheher being the city, but this imagination also incorporated the smaller components or semi-urban components, which were the Kasbas and the Muzafats and so on, which was a far greater conglomeration of space in length and breadth. Now, the limits of this urban, suburban, rural complex also represented the extent of the Sultanate's control in the immediate context of Delhi. So beyond this perimeter, Delhi was surrounded by forests and hill tracts with quite a few questionable and recalcitrant elements. And this is something that you can still see today in parts of Delhi, like the Ridge, for instance. It is still quite hilly and bushy and shrubby and so on. So imagine the landscape back then. So even in the 1260s, for instance, according to Ziauddin Barni, the Mayos, the community of the Mayos would come up all the way to the outskirts of the capital city or the Sheher in Mehroli itself. So imagine this is the capital of a sultanate that is ruling over much of north and central India, but the capital itself is not too safe. So, to the north and the west, of the city, the project of expanding the Sultanate's authority continued as late as Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign in the late 14th century. Now, clearly, Sultanate Delhi had its political geography and geographical limits, while despite ruling an empire. Now, keeping this thing in mind, some of the outer coordinates of 13th century Delhi can be guessed at. These are not very accurate estimates, but these are estimates nonetheless. So you have places like Tilpat, which is to the southeast, and places like Loni, which is across the Yamuna to the northeast. Now, I might argue that this triangle of a Sultanate era Delhi can be completed by a site like Sultangarh. Now, the mausoleum's fortress-like appearance can now be made more sense of, because what happens is that it demarcated a greater Delhi of sorts, but it also constructed an important and visually striking funerary monument at this location, which Iltutmish used much like a landmark or a milestone. which would really give you the impression that you were entering the capital and the realm of the Sultanate, and so it was a check or a warning to anyone who was planning on some funny business. And last but not the least, as far as uh, Sultangari's location within the larger context of the Sultanate architecture of the time is concerned. Again, although today it is not that well known of a monument, but if you look at some corresponding constructions of the time, we can see that Sultangari was very much part of the narrative of the slave or Mamluk dynasty and of what was happening in the Sultanate at the time. So if you compare something like the Quwwatul Islam Mosque in the Qutub complex today, you will see that both of them are built on a high plinth or platform. They have corner bastions or towers. They both use pillars, domes, and other objects of spoliage from earlier Hindu Jain temples, and they are both approached through a tall flight of stairs and so on. And so it is definitely not an isolated monument, and it was very much prominent within the narrative of the Sultanate at the time. Yeah.
Okay. And what caused the resurgence of Sultangari in the 14th century?
Yeah, so Sultangari never really goes out of complete, prominence, in the sense that after Iltutmish's death, Sultangari becomes something of a royal necropolis. So till then, you have Nasiruddin Mahmud, who was a prince, who was not a sultan himself, who was buried there. But after that, there are two sultans of Delhi who were younger sons of Iltutmish, who were also buried near the primary monument, and these were Ruknuddin Firoz Shah and Muizuddin Behram Shah. So now, when you have these personalities being interred in this particular site, there is a sense that this place had become something of a royal necropolis, which was being used to bury royal personalities, and that brings it with it a certain kind of or a certain amount of importance. But despite that, Sultangari does go into a bit of anonymity for a stretch of time through the late 13th and early 14th century. It is not really talked about. But it is only during the reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, again from 1351 to 1388, that this site receives a renewed amount of attention. And it is also in the monarch's own Futuhat-e Firoz Shahi that we first find a mention of this place. And by now, this locality is known as Malikpur. So back in the 13th century, these slaves, people like Aibak and Iltutmish and Balban and so on, who became high-ranking nobles and officers, were termed as Maliks. That was their title. And so, because these Maliks, or exalted Maliks, were buried there, people like Nasiruddin Mahmud and Ruknuddin Firoz and so on, this area itself had come to be known as Malikpur. So again, there is this intimate connection with what was happening in the Sultanate at large that you can still see in Sultangari. Now, although Firoz Shah was restoring a kind of a lost legacy, there was also a greater project that Firoz Shah had embarked upon at this point of time. So it was under Firoz Shah that a concerted effort was exerted, not just to repair and renovate existing structures, but also to consolidate the frontiers of Delhi itself. So Firoz Shah was a great conservator and renovator of his time. And for instance, he renovated the Qutub Minar. He cleaned up the horse cars tank, which had by then been emptied of water and so on. So he was very particular about reviving the lost glories of the Sultanate, and it is really under him that Delhi emerges as a single unit instead of these patches of lands and constructions here and there. And as far as the frontiers of Delhi are concerned, Firoz Shah turned his attention to the north and west again, and he used the royal activity of the hunt or the shikar and the construction of shikar gahs or hunting lodges to push the city's boundaries into the more remote tracts, and hence embedding Sultanate authority in those frontier portions of the city. Even today, one can find the Malcha Mahal on the southern ridge west of Raisina Hill, or the Kushaki Shikar on the North Delhi ridge near the Delhi University North Campus, and these stand as reminders of this expansion. Now, Sultangari, in my mind at least, featured prominently in this framework. So, and this happened in two ways. One, of course, is its location on the frontier. And so, again, Firoz Shah could use it much like his other shikargahs in terms of mapping the external boundaries of the city, but also the The mausoleum of Sultangadi provided Firoz Shah with an opportunity to convey a different kind of a message as well. Now, it is important to note here that in addition to renovating the mausoleum, the grave itself, he also constructed a Jami Masjid, or a Friday mosque, near the primary funerary monument. Now, this is interesting because Firoz Shah had also instituted the reading of the names of all the preceding Sultanate rulers in the khutbah. Now, as you know, the khutbah is a prayer that is read during the Friday namaz, during the Friday prayers,
Yeah.
and in the khutbah, the nailing monarch is mentioned, and it is a great vehicle of sovereignty. Now, what Firoz Shah did was he included the names of all the earlier Sultanate rulers in this khutbah along with his own, and so he did this brilliant thing where uh, he removed dynastic and ethnic differences, and he joined the story of the Sultanate so far into one single narrative. And if you think about it, even today we study the Sultanate in the same way as one single event. And so one can probably look at Firoz Shah as the pioneer for this move. And so when you see a mosque being built next to a monument like Sultan Gadi, and when you think that the khutbah was also being read in that very mosque, you can see that Firoz Shah was trying to articulate a different view of the Sultanate, and he was also trying to connect it to places like Sultan Gadi, where you had earlier sultans being buried, and which was therefore a great site for the earlier history of the Sultanate, which Firoz Shah could always use. And he would leave behind inscriptions, and he would also talk about it in his sources. So he wasn't just renovating them, but he was also telling you that, what, I've repaired this place, and now I'm also connected to this site's history. And he certainly chose Sultangadi as one of the sites that he wanted to connect himself to. And I think that should tell us why it is important to a great extent. Yeah.
Okay. Shahi Maqbare se Mazar tak, the tomb has really endured the test of time. And
Mhm.
today it is worshipped by both Hindus and Muslims who, come here to offer prayers. So what is
Yeah.
the status of this place today, and in the hearts of people, what does Sultangiri really mean to them?
Yeah, I mean, that of course constitutes the most fascinating aspect of Sultangadi's story, really. Now, the settlement of Malikpur and the monument of Sultangadi both really recede into a kind of darkness again for about 3 centuries following Firoz Shah Tughlaq, and they reappear again during the late Mughal period. And from this time, we have an extensive, although dilapidated, set of archaeological remains in the form of domestic structures of modest pedigree, but they still remain. Now, according to S.A. Naqvi, who conducted a site for the archaeological survey in 1947, the site had been abandoned, around 2 centuries before the time of his writing. So, somewhere in the late 18th century or so, according to him, due to a severe drought. However, Anand Taneja, in his brilliant book Genealogy, cites the Murakai Dehli of Dargah Kuli Khan from the mid 18th century as the first record when the site is mentioned as a site of veneration, where people go to worship at the altar of a saint, or the resting place of a saint or peer. So this also combines with happenings in Delhi in the late 18th and early 19th century, when the control of the Mughals has really been limited to the city and the Red Fort, and the Mughal emperors and their retinue increasingly travel to Mehroli as a kind of a leisure and vacation spot, and also to hunt and so on. So it might be that once the Mughals started giving a lot of attention to Mehroli all over again, places like Sultangadi, which were close to Mehroli, became inhabited by people who are also moving to Mehroli or settling in and around to kind of benefit from the Mughal attention. So we see this in the late 18th and early 19th century, and it is also in 1847 that we first find a mention of this settlement as Sultan Ghadi. So this name comes up in 1847 in Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's very famous, Asarus Sanadid. Now, when referring to the Sultan in this Sultan Ghadi, were the people referring to Nasiruddin Mahmud or to the supposed saint interred in the crypt is difficult to understand. But certainly, Sir Syed believed that the tomb was deserving of mention. Now, so how does this transition takes place from a funerary royal monument to a mazar of a Pir Baba. Now, today, of course, Sultangarhi is primarily a mazar. That is what its popularity is all about. And it is deeply embedded in the local psyche. People regularly visit the mazar, not just from Sultangarhi and Mahipalpur, but also from more distant villages and localities like Rangpuri Pahari, Masoodpur, Kishangarh, as well as UP from Uttar Pradesh. Now, the Urs, or the death anniversary of the saint is also observed, according to certain reports, with much fanfare. In fact, S.A. Naqvi in his study mentioned the popularity of the shrine and the throngs of pilgrims who used to arrive at the Urs every year, suggesting that it was already an established practice. Even today, there is a steady flow of visitors on Thursdays, which I was lucky enough to encounter also during my field trips there. You have drummers from nearby Rangpuri, and you have stalls selling offerings for the shrine, and people coming in and going out throughout. Now, Naqvi says that the tomb was sacred to Muslims back in 1947, but today there is no doubt that both Hindus and Muslims come here in equal numbers. The stall keepers are mostly Hindu from my experience, and so are most of the buyers. They are offering prayers, incense stakes, sweets, but not just at the grave shrine inside the crypt, but also at the mihrab screen, which points to Mecca and the Qibla, which is definitely a very Islamic device, but that doesn't stop visitors from offering their respects there. Some even kiss that screen and touch their foreheads to it, which I found very moving and very interesting. Now, the construction and proliferation of Sultangarhi's memory is a bit more complicated than that, and it also conceals certain tensions. Now, unlike historically spiritual sites like the dargahs of Nizamuddin Aulia or Bakhtiyar Kaki, or the Ajmer Sharif Dargah and so on, Sultangarhi almost certainly did not start out as the final resting place of a saint, or at least that's what the sources tell us. But the first clue as to this metamorphosis may lie in the nature of its imagined or real past as a Hindu shrine. Now, with the main fortress-like monument having been built around this possibly pre-Sultanate chamber, which is quite dark and seems like a subterranean space, it does give off the overall effect of a Garbhagriha or a sanctum sanctorum that we find in countless Hindu temples today. So there is a certain amount of memory which might suggest that this was an earlier temple that was converted to a mausoleum. But what is clear, definitely, is that with time, the grave of Nasiruddin Mahmud, who was a son of a slave sultan of Delhi, was wrapped with a new cloak of saintly charisma, and it was aided perhaps in no small part by the visual connect it would have established with visitors. So Hindus connected with it through the Garbhagriha, Muslims connected with it in a different way, and so on. Now, Dharam Singh, who is this person I met during my visits, who used to sell tickets there, had a rather different and noteworthy view. According to him, this transformation, of the site from being a funerary monument to the grave of a Pir Baba was affected to avoid lafra or conflict and controversy. And I was curious to find out what lafra he's talking about. Now, immediately when you look back to S.A. Naqvi's study, which was published in 1947, the year immediately grabs your attention, because 47 was, of course, the year of independence and the partition, and this was a time which was very harrowing for monuments as well as human lives. And this is what Anant Taneja also talks about in Genealogy, where he talks about the targeting of architectural and built lives as well. Because these monuments often carried with them a certain weight of conquest and a Muslim past. So during the heady and violent times of the partition, some people felt that they had to be erased or defaced and so on. So like many other Islamic shrines and mosques and graveyards, Hindu mobs sadly damaged and defaced Sultangarhi as well. So my question is, did the spirituality of the mausoleum have anything to do with it, or simply the fact that it was a Sultanate era monument? Probably both. Now, since the independence of the country, the rehabilitation of Sultangarhi, has been filled with hiccups. So, for instance, a petition for the shrine's restoration by the Jamiat Ulema Hind in 1955 for the Urs was somewhat, to a great extent, put down and denied by the ASI. So the ASI conducted repairs there, but at the same time, they said that the site had been dead for many years, and so there was no point for celebrating the Urs. Now, this is odd because only 8 years before that ASI report, Naqvi states that the Urs had been celebrated with much fanfare, on that site every year. So, and Anand Taneja even cites that before the partition, Sultangarhi was one of the many venerated dargahs in Delhi. So it was quite well known, and people would come here as well. So, there is the probability that Sultangarhi has fallen victim to the selective and archival amnesia of the post-independence India. Whenever it comes to sites which might have a certain problematic, past and so on. But certainly today, Sultangarhi's message is of syncretism, it is of interfaith harmony, and there is absolutely no doubt about that. And this is also interesting because some people who visit the shrine contrast Sultangarhi with other more Islamic shrines, if I may use that term, quote unquote, like Bakhtiyar Kaki's Dargah or so on. So according to them, there is a difference between what is Islamic and what is Islamicate. So a difference between something that is probably more sectarian and probably more syncretic. This is their opinion, of course, but I was curious to find what they felt about this. And for them, the saint who is supposedly residing inside the monument represent both Hindus and Muslims, and they see no harm in referring their prayers and their desires to this particular saint. Now, today, if you visit the shrine on any Thursday, you might find, like I did, a woman who was visibly Hindu in her appearance and in her getup, but who invoked Jai Baba in front of the mihrab of all places, or a local reveler who shouted out praises for Shiva and Parvati to the beats of the dholaks outside. So these are things that really, they really appeal to you in ways that are hard to articulate, because this is what India in the 21st century is supposed to be, and how this monument has managed to survive and adapt to these times is in itself an incredible story. So I just wanted to end on this final point, which is an anecdote that Anand Taneja had mentioned in his book. So he documented a story of these two friends who used to visit Sultangarhi together. And so their journey would usually encompass many neighborhoods of Delhi, and they would travel on foot through jungles and deserted areas and so on and so forth, and eventually arrive at Mehroli, and then cross Mehroli to arrive at Sultangarhi itself. Now, the reason why I bring this up is today that landscape and that geography of a historical and of a spiritual Delhi is almost non-existent. Those jungles and those vacant stretches of land have been replaced by highways and railway lines and residential blocks and offices and malls and campuses and so on and so forth. So the reason why I'm always drawn to Sultangarhi is that Sultangarhi represents a dying link to that earlier Sultanate and Mughal era geography of the city, the kind that we find a mention of in say texts like the Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi, for instance, or the Murakkah-e-Dehli, for instance, texts which talk about Sultangarhi as a site, as a neighborhood. Today, Sultangarhi itself is like a time capsule, because if you reach there, suddenly time seems to stop, and once you go up to the terrace, you can look around Delhi, and it seems like Sultangarhi exists in a bubble, and only certain portions of that earlier of that earlier past have managed to remain intact and survived in the Delhi of today. And last but not the least, today, of course, the site is protected as an archaeological survey, archaeological park. But the attention given to the monument has been a bit topsy-turvy, because there are parts of those late Mughal residential areas which are highly dilapidated, but then there are portions which are reasonably better maintained. But the memory of this Pir Baba, whether historical or ahistorical, manages to keep Sultangarhi alive and kicking in 2021. So yeah.
Thank you, Akash, for taking us back in time and sharing such wonderful insights. So, for all our listeners, if you would like to visit, Sultangarhi is in Mahipalpur village on the Mehroli Palam Road near Vasant Kunj. That's all from us today. Thank you for joining us.